My name is Mary. I'm 62 years old, living in Oregon, and I used to be the wife of one of the founding members of the largest investment fund on the West Coast, Henry Whitaker. But that day, during the will reading, as the entire family sat in silence waiting for my name to be called, my former daughter-in-law, Lauren, stood up and coldly declared, "Mary has been removed from the trust. All assets now belong to me." I sat there, frozen, in the very room that had belonged to our family for 40 years. No one spoke. No one looked at me. Have you ever been erased from your own life by someone you once loved? If you've ever been cast out of a family, a legacy, or a memory, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Because what happened after that announcement was just the beginning. I don't remember how long I sat there after Lauren declared I was no longer in the will. Every sound seemed to fade from the room, except the ticking of the clock on the wall where Henry used to hang the map of all the places we'd traveled together. I had cared for him through the final year of his life, from the stroke to those chemo sessions that left him unable to stand on his own. There were nights I stayed awake beside his hospital bed just to keep his hand from trembling from the cold. Mornings when I quietly made the oat milk he liked, even though he'd only take one sip and turn away. I didn't do it out of obligation. I did it because he was my husband, my partner for 43 years. And Lauren? She was busy hosting charity galas, posing with donors, giving interviews as if she were the guardian of Henry's legacy. I didn't blame her for seizing the opportunity. But what I couldn't understand was why erase me, someone who had stood by him for nearly half a century, as if I had never existed. After the funeral, I thought I'd have at least a few weeks to gather myself. But just 3 days later, a young woman from the foundation, someone I had never seen before, came to me with a form in her hand. "Mrs. Mary, the interim executive director has requested that the main residence be vacated to reorganize foundation operations. The transition period is within 5 days. We can assist with moving a portion of your personal belongings." I looked at her. No anger, no words, just silence. She probably didn't know that house was built in 1985, that I had personally chosen the kitchen tiles, the living room curtains, and every blanket Henry used when he suffered insomnia while launching the company. "What about the rest?" I asked, my voice steady. She hesitated, glanced at her clipboard. "According to the notice, remaining items will be temporarily sealed in the Foundation's storage facility. Once the board reaches consensus, they will announce the official course of action." I nodded, took a step back, so slight that I didn't even realize I had accepted it. I no longer had any authority. In their eyes, I had been removed from every right to decide. I was only allowed to take some clothes, a few notebooks, and one photo of Henry and me in Montana. The wooden frame still bore the crack from the time he dropped it while looking for an old love letter. They packed everything else. Henry's library, the Japanese tea set I bought in Kyoto, the bookshelf he built by hand, and placed Foundation asset tags on each item. I stood in the yard, watching the truck doors close behind them. I didn't cry. I'd been through worse. But inside, something went cold. I'd moved into the small lakeside cabin once our weekend retreat, not far from the main house, but a world apart. No staff, no rose bushes trimmed outside, just me and silence, sometimes broken by birds or wind brushing the porch roof. That evening, while sorting through boxes from the old storage room a friend helped bring over, I found a small wooden box, worn, locked. On its lid, written faintly in silver pencil, "Don't open in anger." I'd touched it, and suddenly, memory rushed back. A night, months ago, Henry sat at his desk, hands trembling as he placed this box on the table and stared at me for a long time. He didn't speak, I didn't ask, but something in his eyes told me he was hiding something important, something he wasn't ready to say. I turned the box over. There was a small hollow at the base. I gently pried it open with my fingernail, and beneath the velvet lining was a key. A steel one, heavy and cold, clearly made for a bank security vault. No bank name, no account number, just the key. I sat down, hands in my lap, staring at it. Maybe this was the explanation Henry never got to give. Or maybe it meant nothing at all. But in that moment, I felt something unfinished. A door that hadn't fully closed. And the key was in my hand. The next morning, I sat by the window with a cup of cold coffee, the key lying still on the table like an unanswered question. In Henry's notebook, among recipes and doctor appointments, I remembered seeing a short line. Cedar Ridge Bank, Box 412. I hadn't thought much of it then, figured it was a note about investments or accounting files. But now, I couldn't look away from that line. Cedar Ridge Bank was an old branch in a quiet business district near town center. The room inside had a low ceiling and narrow windows. An aging employee with patient eyes led me to the basement after checking my ID and Henry's notarized signature I still had in the ledger. "Mr. Whitaker was a long-time client," he said softly. "This box hasn't been touched in years, but we're authorized to open it with the original key and a valid pre-death authorization. Your paperwork checks out." I nodded, said nothing. The steel door creaked open. In that cold space, Box 412 was pulled out. It was heavier than I expected. I placed it on the table, took a deep breath, and opened the lid. There was no money, no financial documents. Just an old envelope, a black and white photo faded with time, and a silver USB drive, clearly encrypted. I picked up the photo first. Henry, about 30 years younger, stood beside an unfamiliar young woman with dark brown hair and a soft, distant smile. On the back, in Henry's familiar handwriting, "The truth must be protected before it's too late." My fingers tightened around the photo. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know who the woman was. I didn't recognize her from any of Henry's stories. And Henry, so clear, so transparent, never one to keep secrets. Why would he hide this photo in a private vault with an encrypted USB? I couldn't decode it on my own. So I brought the USB home, wrapped it in linen, and placed it in the old wooden box on the bookshelf. Then I reached out to a tech expert, a young engineer who once studied under my son before he passed away. His name was Jake. He lived in a small apartment filled with gadgets. When I placed the USB on the table, he looked up at me for a moment, then nodded. "You want to know what's on this?" "I need to know." He didn't ask more, just said it would take a few days. The encryption wasn't standard, looked like it had been set up by Henry himself or someone very good. I thanked him and turned to leave. But before I walked out, I paused. "Jake, if this has something someone kept secret their whole life, do you think I should be prepared for what's inside?" He just smiled gently. "The truth doesn't wait for readiness. It only waits for courage." I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept spinning through possibilities: a hidden investment, an unknown child, a scandal involving Lauren, or worse, a mistake Henry couldn't undo. I had no one to share this with. No one, except a name that suddenly echoed in my memory like a voice from the past. Ethan Marsh. Ethan had once been Henry's closest friend, the co-founder of their first company before some internal disagreement led him to walk away from everything. They had been so close, I once thought Ethan would be Henry's best man if we ever renewed our vows. But one day, he vanished. Gone from the office, the files, the boardroom, as if erased from the family photo. I still had his number, an old business card, pressed between the worn seams of my leather wallet. I called. The line was still active. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but the familiar softness was still there. "Mary? It's me." He paused, then slowly said, "I figured you'd call, sooner or later." I didn't need to ask what he meant. We agreed to meet Friday afternoon at a small cafe the three of us used to visit for private planning sessions. I remembered its dark wood floors and the faint scent of cinnamon lingering in the air. I didn't expect Ethan to have all the answers, but if anyone had ever known Henry deeply enough to recognize when something felt wrong, it was him. And now, I was laying what was left of a fractured trust on the table. Ethan arrived 10 minutes before me. He looked the same, only grayer at the temples, with eyes that held an extra layer of guarded wisdom. His earth-toned coat, scuffed leather shoes, and the way he leaned slightly to offer me a seat made it feel like time hadn't touched him. "I'm not sure how much help I can be," he said after some small talk, "but if Henry left you something, I might understand part of why." I opened my bag and placed the photograph and Henry's note on the table. Ethan studied them for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he read the handwriting on the back. He touched the corner of the photo, then looked up. Her name was Alice. The words pulled me backward in time, to the days when Henry had never spoken of anyone but me. I swallowed. "You knew her?" Ethan nodded. "Only met her once. She was a financial research assistant on a project Henry was funding on the East Coast. I don't know how far things went between them, but Henry once told me she had access to sensitive internal documents about the fund." I stayed quiet, not because I didn't believe him, but because I needed him to keep going. And he understood that. "About a year before Henry passed," he said, "he called me. Private meeting, no one else knew. He suspected Lauren was building a web of influence within the foundation, quietly consolidating control after her son's death. He told me if anything happened to him, I was to reach out to Mary." I clenched my hands beneath the table. "But you left before that." Ethan exhaled, his eyes flickering with something close to guilt. "I didn't leave because I wanted to." Less than 2 weeks after that meeting, I received an anonymous envelope. No name, no seal. But it contained complete copies of my personal financial records, including my ex-wife's accounts and details about my son's university tuition, alongside one simple sentence: "Best to walk away while you still can." The air inside the cafe seemed to still. "I understand," I said. "You chose to protect your family." Ethan nodded. "But I've regretted it every day." We sat in silence for a while. I looked out the window, watching the last golden leaf drop from the branch. At that moment, my phone buzzed. A text from Jake: "Can you come by? The USB's decrypted. There's something you need to hear." I looked at Ethan. "I have to go. This might be the missing piece." "Want me to come with you?" he asked. I hesitated for a second. "Maybe you should." Jake's apartment felt smaller than I remembered. Bright monitors, tangled cords, and in the middle, a laptop playing an encrypted audio file. Jake muted it as I stepped in. "I haven't opened all of them yet," he said. "There are 4 audio files, all encrypted using Henry's personal voice key, nearly impossible to fake." I nodded. "Play the first one." Henry's voice came through, raspy but unmistakably his. April 19th, private memo. "This morning's meeting with Lauren felt off. She pushed for me to shift majority control of the foundation to a board she hand-picked. I refused. She said, 'Let's not end this with a war between legacy and heir.'" I've never seen that look in her eyes before. I placed a hand on my chest. It was as if each word filled the emptiness I'd been carrying. "The next one," I whispered. The second file was a meeting clip. Lauren's voice rang out clearly. "Henry, you need to understand this career needs a sharper face. You've done enough. It's time the next generation takes over." Henry replied calmly, "Taking over doesn't mean taking control. Mary and I built this foundation not for power, but for principle." I turned away, eyes stinging. Ethan stood next to me, shoulders tight. "There are 2 more," Jake said softly. "Wait," I replied. "I need air." I stepped onto the small balcony and looked down at the street. The wind tugged at my hair, carrying echoes of old memories. Henry had seen it all coming. He had tried to protect his legacy, and he believed I was the only one who could finish what he started. I returned inside and gave a quiet nod. Play the next one. And I knew there would be no turning back now. Jake opened the third audio file. The sound began with papers rustling, then Henry's voice. Clearer, but slower, like he was measuring every word. April 27th. Reviewed quarterly reports. Noticed a $3 million transfer categorized under diplomatic reallocation, something I never approved. Destination account is based in the Cayman Islands, signed by LL. Ethan glanced at me. We both knew. LL could only mean Lauren Langford. Lauren denied it when I asked, Henry continued, his voice dropping. Said it was an old directive, a leftover from secure investment dealings. But when I requested an independent audit, she refused. Suggested I rest up, to clear my mind. My chest tightened. Henry never told me about this. During his final months, he only held my hand at night, his eyes always trying to seem calm. Play the rest, I whispered. 3 days later, his voice came again. I received an urgent letter from Lauren asking me to sign over the role of board chair under a temporary proxy. I refused. I told her plainly, this foundation doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to the community, to Mary, to everyone who's believed in us for decades. A long pause followed in the recording. Then Henry spoke again, his voice cracked. I don't know how much time I have. Maybe a lot, maybe very little. I've started forgetting things. I'm tired. But if I can't fix this myself, Mary will know what to do. I covered my mouth, not out of shock, but because a sudden wave of emotion surged up, as if a broken part of me had finally been restored. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder, silent. Jake sat still, eyes locked on the screen. You want to take a break? Ethan asked softly. I shook my head. No, I need to hear the rest. Jake opened the final file. May 3rd, Henry's voice came through, noticeably weaker. I left a draft of the new will in my private safe at Cedar Ridge. It may not be notarized, but it clearly states my intent to reinstate Mary as co-trustee, to audit all financial activities over the last 2 years, and to suspend all investment decisions authorized by Lauren during my treatment. I looked toward the small window, where the afternoon sun filtered through gray curtains. Outside, a few cars rolled by slowly, unaware that the world inside this small room was shifting with every word Henry spoke. The original was replaced, I said, my voice rough. At the will reading, they used an entirely different version, no mention of me, no mention of an audit, not a single word of what he truly wanted. Ethan nodded. Then we need proof. And these recordings, they're our starting point. Jake transferred the files to a separate hard drive, re-encrypting them with dual-layer protection. You can keep the master copy, but, if needed, I can extract them into admissible digital evidence. I held the drive in my hand. It felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried, not because of weight, because of what it held. The truth. A truth Lauren never thought I'd uncover. Do you think he was afraid? Jake asked quietly. I looked up. I think he feared silence, that if he left nothing behind, everything he built would be distorted. And I almost let that happen. Ethan sat upright. But now, you're not the forgotten woman anymore. I smiled, though my eyes were still wet. No, I'm the one Henry trusted until the very end. What I felt inside wasn't grief anymore. It was something deeper. Resurgence. A responsibility. To Henry. To the truth. And to the part of myself that had once been erased. Ethan and I sat in the conference room at Attorney Briggs's office on Tuesday morning, sunlight streaming through the large window and reflecting softly off the oak table. Vanessa entered with quiet confidence, white blouse pressed sharp, a folder tucked beneath her arm, and the focused look of someone who didn't waste time. "You're Mary Whitaker?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Henry Whitaker's legal wife," I replied calmly, "and I believe my husband's legacy is being misrepresented." Vanessa pulled out a chair and opened the folder. "I reviewed the recordings you sent last night. Impressive. Mr. Whitaker seems to have foreseen quite a bit. The question now is, do we have enough to convince the court that the current will is invalid?" I looked at Ethan, then back to her. "If we don't, I'll find what's missing." Vanessa nodded once. "Good." She began outlining the legal process. "If I wanted to contest the will, I'd need to prove at least one of three things: that the document was forged, that Henry lacked mental capacity when he signed it, or that he was coerced into changing it. "His voice recordings give us a significant lead," she said. "But we still need to verify one thing. Was there a valid prior will, one never officially revoked? And if so, why was it replaced?" Ethan pulled a weathered slip of paper from his jacket pocket. On it was the address of the first law firm Henry had ever used, years before founding the foundation. "I remember Henry once said if there was anything he absolutely needed to keep safe, he'd store it there. A place no one would think to check anymore." Vanessa immediately contacted the firm. She introduced herself succinctly, then shifted into the precise, razor-sharp tone of a seasoned attorney. "We're verifying whether a will was submitted around March of last year. The name is Henry Whitaker." There was a short silence on the line. Then the person said something that made Vanessa freeze, listening intently. At last she hung up and turned to us. They confirmed on March 24th, Henry submitted an updated will, fully signed, 2 legal witnesses, and an internal scan on file. My heart pounded. "So, it still exists?" Vanessa shook her head, her tone dimming. "Not quite." A month later, a request came in from Lauren Langford, asking to temporarily replace it with a more current version, supposedly per Henry's request. The firm complied. But there's no record of Henry personally making that request. I clasped my hands together in my lap. "And no one verified it?" "No one," Vanessa said, "because the request came from someone legally authorized, someone Henry had temporarily granted power of attorney during his treatment." Ethan shook his head, voice thick with anger. "He would never have allowed that. Not under those circumstances." Vanessa fell silent for a moment, then stood. "I'll file for an emergency court order from the district to freeze all financial activity within the Whitaker Foundation. Grounds: suspected misconduct in replacing a legal document. If granted, Lauren won't be able to move funds, sign contracts, or continue operating until the issue is resolved." "How long will it take?" I asked. "With this level of severity, I can file today. If we're lucky and reach a judge, we could have a ruling within 3 business days." I nodded, holding back tears. Not from sadness, but because everything was finally taking shape. I was no longer standing outside. I was stepping into the role I was meant to take, the protector of my husband's legacy, the one to restore what was rightfully true. "Mary," Vanessa said while gathering her papers, "this might not be a short fight, but if what you say is true, we have a foundation to overturn everything, and I'll stand with you." I looked at her, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belief. Not just in the law or the evidence, but in myself. I left the office with cold wind slipping beneath my collar. But inside, for the first time in months, there was a quiet flame. Not for revenge, but to bring light to what never should have been buried. Henry had left the clues, and I was following the path he always hoped I'd find. That morning, a thick envelope was left at my doorstep, no sender listed, only my name, embossed in silver above a chilling header, Whitaker and Langford Legal Group. I carried it into the kitchen, set it beside my untouched tea, and sat down, breathing deeply before opening it. Inside was a 2-page letter printed on watermarked paper from the firm Lauren had retained. The tone was sharp, deliberate, They claimed I was interfering unlawfully with the rightful transfer of assets, and that if I did not withdraw the lawsuit and cease all reputational harm to the foundation, they would pursue civil litigation for damages, both reputational and financial. I folded the letter, laying it down like any other piece of paper. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because the only thing I felt clearly now was that Henry would never allow someone else to write his legacy in lies. 3 days later, while I was still gathering the new evidence Vanessa had requested, an ivory invitation arrived. This time, it was sent openly, from Lauren's own secretary's office. The format was identical to every upscale charity event I used to attend alongside Henry: embossed paper, scripted lettering, and a neatly arranged list of partners printed in solemn elegance at the bottom. A night honoring Henry Whitaker, a beloved husband, father, and visionary leader, to be held at the Clarendon Hall, New York. Guest of honor, Mrs. Mary Whitaker. I laughed. It was a half-hearted invitation, not meant to honor but to perform, a staged illusion for the media. She didn't want me there for Henry's sake. She wanted me there to create a carefully controlled picture where I'd simply be a polite silhouette behind the spotlight she was trying desperately to maintain. I called Ethan. He picked up after the second ring. "You received the invitation?" "I think it was printed even before I filed the petition." "I have something," he said slowly, "and I think you should see it before you go." That evening I arrived at his house. A stack of documents had already been placed on the table, neatly clipped. The first page was a scanned copy of Henry's life insurance policy, updated 6 months before his death. I skimmed past the name, the issuing company, then stopped at the beneficiary line. Not Lauren. Not me either. But a name I had never heard in my 43 years with Henry. Rachel Linwood. I looked at Ethan, waiting for an explanation. He was silent for a moment, then gave a small nod. I've never heard Henry mention her either. But what's troubling is there's no paperwork showing Rachel ever worked with the foundation. No files, no emails, no contracts. Could be an alias, I guessed, or someone Henry was trying to protect. I said nothing. I just turned to the next page. A detailed record tied to the insurance policy. Henry had listed Rachel's contact address as an apartment in Connecticut. A small note below read, "Only to be executed if no legal next of kin remain." Something twisted in my chest. Not suspicion, but the sense that I was just beginning to pull back the curtain on something far more complex than I'd imagined. I straightened up. "I'm going to New York. Lauren wants a show. Then I'll take center stage. But I'll be bringing something she never expected." Ethan nodded. "I'll have my team monitor media coverage of the event. If Lauren slips, we'll catch it." I stood, clenching my hands tightly. Henry had left behind clues. And now the pieces were moving. Not to harm anyone, but to reveal a truth that was being buried beneath scripted tributes. And I, the one they once pushed out of the frame, was walking straight into the spotlight. Not with anger, but with memory, evidence, and clarity. The Clarendon Hall lobby glowed with soft golden light as I stepped inside. The event had been curated down to the finest detail: silk-draped reception tables, gilded name cards, wine poured with practiced precision by tuxedoed staff. A string quartet played softly near the window. Everything resembled the tribute events Henry and I used to attend, except for one thing. He was no longer here, and the woman at the center tonight was Lauren. I moved slowly down the hall, quietly scanning a sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces. Near the stage, Mark Tiller was already there, holding a glass of wine, looking calm, like just another guest at a routine gala. "You brought what I asked for?" he asked, without turning from the stage. I nodded and quietly pulled a small, silver USB from my clutch. "There are 4 original recordings on this," I said softly. "One of them captures Henry questioning the disappearance of $3 million. If you want the truth, this is it. Mark took it without a word, only giving a slight nod. I won't publish right away, but if you signal me, I'll know it's time. I didn't respond. I just rested my hand briefly on his arm, sealing the agreement. About 30 minutes later, Lauren stepped on stage to prolonged applause. She wore a fitted black gown, hair tied neatly, eyes glowing with confidence as she looked out over the audience. Her voice rang clearly through the microphone. Thank you all for joining us tonight to remember a husband, a father, a leader we all admired. Henry Whitaker. He lived by ideals, led with vision, and left behind a legacy I am honored to continue. I stood at the back of the hall, silent, but when Lauren began speaking about a newly expanded global foundation inspired by Henry's spirit of transparency and integrity, I tilted my head toward Mark. He understood. Just seconds later, phone screens throughout the crowd began lighting up. Then another. And another. The news traveled faster than any words Lauren could muster. Internal recordings reveal Henry Whitaker confronted Lauren Lankford over $3 million missing from foundation accounts. The headline beamed on the news alerts from Mark's account. An audio snippet began circulating on social media within minutes. You're lying, Lauren. I never approved any allocation to the Caymans. And if you can't produce legitimate documentation, I'll call for a full audit. The murmur in the hall became impossible to suppress. Guests began whispering, pulling out their phones. Some stood and quietly walked out. Lauren paused mid-sentence, eyes scanning the room. What's going on? She asked, trying to sound calm. But I saw it. That brief flicker of disorientation in her eyes. A journalist stood up in the center of the room. Ms. Lankford, do you deny the authenticity of the recording that was just released? Lauren's lips tightened. I haven't heard any such recording. This could easily be fabricated. That's Henry's voice. Every word. Another guest interjected sharply. I worked with him for 20 years. I'd know it anywhere. Lauren stepped back slightly. Two event security staff approached the stage, whispered something to her. She nodded quickly and was escorted out through the side exit, trailed by a dozen camera flashes. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken for itself. As I left the main hall, Ethan was waiting in the corridor. In his hand was a blue folder. His face looked tense, but there was something else in his eyes. Discovery. I just got confirmation from a contact at the insurance agency. He said quietly. Rachel Linwood is Henry's biological daughter. Her mother was a doctor at a relief camp in North Carolina where Henry volunteered in the 90s. I froze. Is she still alive? Ethan was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. She passed away 2 years ago in an accident. Henry didn't have time to make everything public, but before that he made sure to legally name her as the life insurance beneficiary, and more importantly, he didn't hide her from official records. Lauren tried to erase her name from the estate documentation, and that changes everything. I leaned back against the wall. The things buried under layers of pretense, the whispered truths drowned out by applause, were finally surfacing. The truth didn't need me to scream it. It just needed me not to step back. And today, in the very place she tried to stage a show, I had let the truth walk out. At the right time, in the right place, in the right way. Vanessa sat across from me in the law office's conference room, folders arranged in neat order by type of evidence. She opened them one by one, scanning as though piecing together a puzzle that was now all but complete. We have everything, she said evenly. The original recordings, Henry's handwritten notes, the insurance policy, the bank transfer records to the Cayman account, and, most critically, the legal confirmation of Rachel Linwood's identity. I nodded slightly, saying nothing, not because I had nothing to say, but because I understood this was Vanessa's moment, and she knew exactly what to do with the truth in front of her. The signature on the current will has been examined, she continued, and it's not Henry's. The two witnesses listed never met him. Ethan sat beside me, arms folded, brows furrowed. Is that enough to open a criminal investigation? Not just an investigation, Vanessa replied. A prosecution. 3 days later, an emergency hearing was held at the Manhattan District Court. Security was tight, not because of the case's scope, but because the name Henry Whitaker, once synonymous with financial transparency, was now at the center of the biggest legal scandal in the Foundation's history. I sat in the third row, between Ethan and Vanessa. In my hands was an old printed copy of the original will Henry had written, with his signature still intact at the bottom. The judge was a woman in her 60s, silver hair tied back, voice clear and unwavering. After hearing Vanessa's arguments and reviewing each piece of evidence, she gave a brief nod and issued a preliminary ruling. The court orders an immediate freeze on all financial operations, assets, and executive powers of the Whitaker Foundation until the investigation concludes. Additionally, an independent review board is to be established, comprising representatives from the Department of Financial Justice and 2 legal examiners nominated by the plaintiff. Lauren did not attend the hearing. Her legal representative read a brief rebuttal, denying all allegations and calling the case an emotionally driven attack. But no one in the room seemed convinced. After the hearing, as I was preparing to leave the courthouse, an older reporter, one who had once interviewed Henry at shareholder meetings, approached me. Mrs. Whitaker, do you plan to pursue compensation for damage to your reputation or financial restitution if the case rules in your favor? I smiled softly. I don't need reputation, and I don't lack money. I only want one thing: for the truth to be restored, and for the foundation Henry built not to become a tool for those who write great speeches but lack basic integrity. The silence after that stretched long enough for me to feel every eye on me. But I didn't flinch. I had lived beside Henry for nearly 50 years. I knew he didn't establish the Whitaker Foundation to build power, but to plant a principle. The next day, I was summoned to a closed session with the temporary board and legal team. They asked if I had specific recommendations for the Foundation's future should the investigation confirm Lauren had forged the will. I sat in a plain glass-walled room, listening to the options on the table: transferring control to the government, merging it with another nonprofit, or dissolving it entirely. I slowly shook my head. I can't agree to any of those, I said. Henry didn't build this to hand it off to the state or to watch it disappear. In the original will, he wrote clearly, if personal management became impossible, the foundation should be transferred to the public, through an independent board including representatives from universities, educational organizations, and a financial oversight group elected by the community. I opened the old printout I had brought and pointed to the section titled Contingency and Succession Plan. This is what he wanted, not me. I'm just the keeper. The board members looked around at one another. No one objected. One nodded. A silver-hailed woman at the end of the table whispered something to her aide. No more words were needed. I knew Henry's intentions had finally been heard, spoken aloud by the person who had walked beside him for a lifetime. Lauren was officially summoned the following week on 3 charges: forging legal documents, misappropriating estate assets, and concealing the identity of the rightful beneficiary. The investigation expanded into pre-death financial transactions and unreported offshore transfers. I didn't attend her hearing, not because I wanted to avoid it, but because I knew justice no longer needed me to finish the work. I had gone farther than I ever thought I could. Not to win, but to return to Henry what he had left behind: integrity. Something that cannot be faked, bought, or erased. 6 months passed. Winter gently stepped aside for the first rays of spring. I walked into the new executive boardroom of the Whitaker Foundation, on the 3rd floor of a modest building in the old office district. No flashy signs, no oversized portraits of Henry like in previous years. Just a long wooden table, simple chairs, and sunlight pouring through open windows. I brought no assistant, wore no formal suit, just the earth-tone sweater Henry once said made me look like the lighting technician of the universe. When I entered, everyone in the room, from new members to familiar faces, stood up, not by command, not by ceremony, but by the quiet reverence I carried as living memory. I gave a small nod, invited them to sit, then chose a seat at the far end. No honorary chair, none needed. I had sat at this table for over 3 decades, not to make decisions, but to ask the question Henry always held sacred. Will what we do today deserve to continue tomorrow? The meeting opened with a short report by the interim chairwoman, Dr. Althea Grayson, a sociologist from Minneapolis, who had worked with Henry during the early days of the scholarship program. Her voice was warm, grounded, without flourish. We have completed the restructuring in line with the original will. The Whitaker Foundation is now formally operating as an independent nonprofit organization, overseen by a rotating board including representatives from public schools, community groups, and 2 permanent members representing the beneficiaries. I listened, took a few notes, and said nothing. When Althea finished, she turned toward me. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, meeting my eyes, "we'd still like to offer our previous invitation, an honorary advisory role on the board." I smiled and gently shook my head. I didn't come here to hold a position. I'd just like to meet with the program team every 3 months. No voting rights, no title. I just want to preserve one thing, the spirit Henry embedded in every scholarship. The core values. That's what we built together. Althea said nothing, just placed her hand on her notebook and nodded slowly. I knew she understood. As the meeting ended, people filed out quietly. No one asked for pictures. No one requested a quote. A few younger members of the new operations team came over to greet me, their eyes respectful and curious, as if I were someone who had survived another era, carrying memories that had never been fully told. I left the building as the sun tilted through the trees. The breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant echoes from a nearby playground. I drove home down the same road Henry used every Monday morning. The trees were the same, but I was not. That afternoon, I sat at the desk in the reading room, where Henry had once spent hours handwriting plans that never saw the light of day. On the desk lay an unopened letter, a thick envelope with his slanted handwriting, marked, "Open only when everything becomes clear." I opened it with a thin letter opener. Inside were 3 pages, each written in bold blue ink, slanting slightly to the right. A habit Henry never changed, even when age made his hand tremble. "Mary, if you're reading this, I may no longer be with you, but I believe in some way you're still moving forward, just as you always have, through every chapter of our lives. I made mistakes, not because I trusted the wrong people, but because I let myself grow too tired to double-check what seemed secure. Sometimes I stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of hope that things would naturally balance. I was wrong. You're the only one who truly understands where this foundation came from. You know it didn't begin with money, but with a promise. To my father, to you, and to myself. If anyone can preserve this organization's conscience, not just in rules or numbers, but in fairness and kindness, it's you. I don't need you to stand on a stage. I just need you not to stay silent. Don't let anyone rewrite what we lived honestly with hollow words. And if one day you feel tired, remember, there was at least one man who lived his entire life just to stand beside you." I folded the letter and placed it back into the drawer of the old wooden desk. Morning light streamed through the curtains, resting gently on the table runner Henry once bought at the Iowa State Fair. I closed my eyes for a moment. No more arguments, no more courts, no more disputes. Only one thing remained unchanged. I had honored the man I loved, and he, even in silence, had always believed in that. Life doesn't always give us the ending we hoped for, but sometimes it opens doors that help us understand love, truth, and resilience more deeply. What do you think of the journey I've walked through? If it were you, would you have the courage to rise? not for wealth, but for what's right. Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear the voices of those who have known loss, injustice, or betrayed trust. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to follow the channel, because there are many more real lives waiting to be told. Broken families, forgotten mothers, truths buried for too long. Each story is a journey, and maybe you'll find a piece of yourself in one of them.